I stared at the termination notice sliding across Kevin's polished desk. My hands trembled as I read the words that would destroy everything I'd built over 6 years at Westbrook Industries. Take the 40% pay cut to stay as a junior associate, or clean out your desk today, Kevin said, tapping his Mont Blanc pen impatiently. Budget's tighter than a drum, Haley. Sorry, but the company's bleeding money. 6 years, 60-hour weeks. Missing Emma's soccer games. Building this marketing department from 3 people to 15. All for this moment in his corner office, with fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like dying insects. What's it gonna be? Kevin pressed. My mortgage, Emma's private school tuition, Mom's assisted living costs, everything hung by a thread. I'm a single mom with no safety net. My ex-husband stopped paying child support months ago. I signed the demotion papers with shaking fingers. Smart choice, Kevin said, leaning back in his leather chair. Oh, by the way, did you see my new Tesla in the parking garage? Figured I deserved a little reward after all the cost-cutting I've been doing. My blood turned to ice. 18 months ago, Kevin Daniels walked into our office as my supposed support system. My previous boss had retired, and I'd been hoping for the promotion. Instead, they brought Kevin in from outside. I'm here to help you succeed, he'd said on his first day, flashing that politician's smile. You know this place inside and out. I'll need your guidance. I believed him. I spent weeks showing him the ropes, explaining client relationships, sharing the strategies that had doubled our revenue. I covered for his mistakes when he sent the wrong presentation to a major client. I stayed late to fix his bungled budget reports. Haley's been invaluable, he told upper management during his first review. Real team player. But something shifted after that meeting. Kevin started attending client calls without me. He began presenting my campaign ideas as his own insights. When executives praised the innovative strategies, Kevin would nod and say, "Well, I've been mentoring the team to think more strategically." The word mentoring made my skin crawl. I'd been here 6 years, he'd been here 6 months. But I kept quiet. I needed this job too much to rock the boat. The changes happened gradually. Kevin started scheduling important meetings when I was out with clients. He'd send follow-up emails to the whole team, summarizing decisions made in my absence, positioning himself as the strategic mind behind every initiative. Haley's great with execution, he'd say in team meetings. But we need more big-picture thinking around here. My responsibilities shifted from strategy to busy work. Instead of developing campaigns, I was proofreading junior staff's presentations. Instead of managing client relationships, I was organizing Kevin's calendar. When I tried to speak up in meetings, Kevin would interrupt with, "That's a good tactical point, Haley, but let's think strategically." The room would nod, and my ideas would disappear into his grand vision. My team members started coming to Kevin first with questions. They weren't being disloyal. They were following the new power structure he'd carefully constructed. At my annual review, Kevin wrote that I was comfortable in an execution role, but lacked the strategic vision for senior leadership. The same strategic vision I'd been demonstrating for years before he arrived. My personal life was crumbling too. My ex-husband, Jake, had stopped paying child support after losing his job. Emma, my 10-year-old daughter, asked why we couldn't go to Disney World like her friends. "Maybe next year, sweetheart," I said, forcing a smile. Mom's dementia was getting worse. The assisted living facility kept calling about missed payments. I was juggling credit cards to keep up with her monthly fees while maintaining Emma's stability. Work became my lifeline. Even with Kevin undermining me, I needed this job desperately. Every time I thought about looking elsewhere, I remembered Emma's school tuition and Mom's care costs. Kevin seemed to sense my vulnerability. He started making comments about the economy, about how lucky we all were to have jobs. "Loyalty goes both ways," he'd say meaningfully. I understood the message. Don't rock the boat. Be grateful. Stay quiet. The more desperate I became, the bolder Kevin grew. He started taking full credit for campaigns I'd developed, even in client presentations. I watched from the back of conference rooms as he claimed my work as his genius. Kevin's systematic undermining reached new levels. In executive meetings I wasn't invited to anymore. He planted seeds of doubt about my capabilities. "Haley's struggling with the new client demands," he told Margaret Thompson, our CEO, according to my friend Grace from Internal Audit. I'm having to provide more hands-on guidance than expected. He started documenting every minor mistake I made while ignoring my successes. When I delivered a campaign 2 days early, he noted that the font size was inconsistent. When I landed a new client worth $200,000, he criticized the contract terms I'd negotiated. Kevin created a paper trail that painted me as incompetent while positioning himself as indispensable. He scheduled key meetings during my vacation, then circulated summaries that showed major decisions happening without my input. The worst part was watching my team lose confidence in me. They'd see Kevin's name on the successful campaigns. They'd hear him correcting my tactical thinking in meetings. Slowly, they started bypassing me for important decisions. I felt like I was drowning, but every time I tried to speak up, Kevin would remind me how volatile the job market was. "We all need to adapt to survive," he'd say with that fake concern. I walked into the accounting department looking for Janet Miller, the kind woman who always asked about Emma. Instead, I found her computer screen open to payroll records. My eyes went straight to Kevin's name. $285,000. My hand started shaking. Last year, when he started, Kevin was making $160,000. That was a 78% increase while I was taking a 40% cut. "Janet?" I called out, but the desk was empty. I stared at those numbers until they blurred. Kevin's new Tesla made perfect sense now. His wife's European vacation photos on social media, his casual mentions of their new house in the hills, all while telling me the company was bleeding money. "She's not here," a voice said behind me. I spun around to find a security guard. "Janet Miller was terminated yesterday. Budget cuts." The room tilted. Janet, who'd been with the company for 12 years. Janet, who knew every employee's birthday. Janet, who always brought homemade cookies to share. Fired for budget cuts, while Kevin got a $125,000 raise. I stumbled out of accounting, my mind racing. How many other lies had Kevin told me? Grace Cox found me in the parking lot, sitting in my car with tears streaming down my face. Grace was the young internal auditor who'd been Janet's closest friend at work. "I heard about Janet," Grace said, sliding into my passenger seat. "This is insane, Haley. She trained half the people in this building." "Kevin said budget cuts," I whispered. Grace's laugh was bitter. "Budget cuts? Do you know how much they spent on consultants last month? More than Janet's entire annual salary." She pulled out her phone, showing me an internal expense report. 5 consultants, all hired in the past 3 months, all young men, all earning premium rates for work that Janet and other experienced employees used to handle. "Something doesn't add up," Grace said. "Janet's been asking questions about these consulting fees. She was worried about financial irregularities." My stomach dropped. "What kind of irregularities?" "Double billing, inflated expenses, consultant contracts that don't match actual work delivered." Grace's voice was shaking with anger. Janet was building a case, but she never got to finish it. We sat in silence, both understanding what this meant. Janet wasn't fired for budget reasons. She was fired because she'd discovered something Kevin wanted hidden. Grace and I started digging deeper. What we found made my stomach sick. In the past month, 3 other long-term employees had been forced to take pay cuts or resign. Sarah from HR, who'd questioned Kevin's hiring practices. Marcus from finance, who'd raised concerns about consultant billing. Linda from operations, who'd pushed back on Kevin's new efficiency measures. All women or men over 40. All replaced by Kevin's young male consultants. The worst discovery came when Grace showed me the consultant contracts. One name jumped out, Tyler Daniels. "That's Kevin's nephew," I breathed. Tyler Daniels, 22 years old, fresh out of college with no experience, making $85,000 as a marketing strategy consultant. More than my new reduced salary. "It gets worse," Grace said. "Look at what he's supposed to be doing." Tyler's contract covered strategic campaign development and client relationship management. The actual work I'd been demoted from. Kevin had literally given my job to his nephew while forcing me to take a massive pay cut. We sat in Grace's cubicle, surrounded by evidence of systemic corruption. Kevin wasn't just undermining me. He was dismantling the entire experienced workforce and replacing them with his personal network. "We have to do something," Grace whispered. "But what?" Kevin had already shown he could make people disappear. That night, Emma asked why we were eating pasta again. I'd served spaghetti with butter 5 nights in a row because it was all I could afford after the pay cut. I'm trying new recipes, I lied, forcing a smile. Emma hugged me tight. It's okay, Mom. I know you're sad about work. My heart broke. I thought I'd been hiding my stress, but kids see everything. Later, while cleaning Emma's room, I found a small envelope under her pillow. Inside was $63 in crumpled bills and coins, her entire allowance savings. A note in her careful handwriting read, "For groceries. Love, Emma." I sat on her bedroom floor and cried until my chest hurt. My 10-year-old daughter was trying to help pay for food because Kevin needed a Tesla. When I finally stopped crying, something had changed inside me. The fear was still there, but underneath it was something harder, something that wouldn't bend anymore. Kevin had pushed too far. He'd made this personal when he threatened my daughter's security and my mother's care. Now he was going to learn what happened when you backed a desperate mother into a corner. I stood up, wiped my eyes, and started planning. I started keeping meticulous records of everything. Every email Kevin sent, every decision he made, every lie he told in meetings. I photographed documents when I could, saved electronic files to personal drives when possible. My phone became my secret weapon. I recorded conversations where Kevin took credit for my work or made promises he didn't keep. I documented his contradictory statements about the company's financial health. The pattern became clear quickly. Kevin was systematically lying about budget constraints while enriching himself and his network. He'd tell staff we couldn't afford basic supplies, then approve expensive consultant contracts for his friends. I found discrepancies in his reports too, client satisfaction scores that didn't match actual feedback, revenue projections that were wildly optimistic to justify his budget increases, performance reviews that contradicted documented achievements. Most damning were his lies about my work. Kevin had been falsifying reports, claiming credit for campaigns I'd developed months before he arrived. He'd taken successful projects from my portfolio and rewritten the history to make himself the architect. I built a detailed timeline proving Kevin's deception. Every document was dated, every witness statement recorded, every financial discrepancy highlighted, but I needed help. Kevin was too well connected for me to take down alone. Grace and I met after hours to review our evidence. She'd been using her auditing access to trace financial irregularities, and what she found was explosive. Kevin's been inflating consulting fees, Grace said, spreading documents across the conference table. Look at these invoices versus actual deliverables. Tyler Daniels had billed 60 hours for a campaign that I'd actually developed. Another consultant charged $15,000 for market research I'd completed the previous year. Kevin was literally billing clients for work his team hadn't done. There's more, Grace continued. He's been using the company credit card for personal expenses. Look at these receipts. Spa treatments for Kevin's wife, disguised as client entertainment. Expensive dinners at restaurants where Kevin had no scheduled meetings. A weekend golf trip labeled as team building, with consultants who'd never worked together. This is fraud, I whispered. Grace nodded grimly. But reporting it won't be easy. You know who the new HR director is, right? My stomach dropped. No. Brad Hutchinson, Kevin's college roommate. They hired him 2 weeks ago to replace Sarah. The system was rigged. Kevin had installed his friend as HR director while getting rid of anyone who might question his actions. We needed another approach. What about going directly to Margaret Thompson? I suggested. Grace shook her head. Kevin's been feeding her information about department problems. She might think you're just a disgruntled employee. We needed more evidence, and we needed allies Kevin couldn't control. I decided to approach Tyler Morrison, one of Kevin's newer hires who seemed uncomfortable with the boys' club atmosphere. Tyler was young but smart, and I'd noticed him flinching during Kevin's more inappropriate comments. Can we talk privately? I asked Tyler after a particularly awkward team meeting. We went to a coffee shop across the street. Tyler looked nervous, constantly glancing around like he expected Kevin to appear. I know this is awkward, I started, but I need to ask you something. Are you comfortable with how things are run in our department? Tyler's shoulders slumped. Honestly? No, but I need this job. Haley, I've got student loans and my mom's medical bills. I understood that desperation. What if I told you there might be a way to make things better? For everyone? Tyler leaned forward. What do you mean? I couldn't reveal everything yet, but I shared enough to gauge his reaction. Tyler's face grew pale as I described Kevin's systematic discrimination and financial irregularities. There's something else you should know, Tyler said quietly. Kevin's been bragging about cleaning house of dead weight. He's planning to fire you entirely within 6 months. My blood went cold. What? He wants to use your reduced performance as justification. Says he's building a case that you can't handle the workload. Tyler looked sick. I thought you should know. Grace's auditing access revealed even more damaging evidence. Kevin had been billing personal expenses to client accounts, mixing his private life with company finances. Look at this, Grace said, pointing to a credit card statement. Kevin charged his wife's spa day to the Westbrook Industries account, called it client relations. We found similar charges going back months. Kevin's personal trainer billed as executive wellness consulting. His daughter's private school tuition disguised as educational partnership development. Even his home security system, labeled as remote work infrastructure. The amounts were staggering. Kevin had stolen over $40,000 in personal expenses while forcing employees to take pay cuts for budget constraints. This is criminal, Grace said. We have enough evidence to send him to prison. But we still needed to be careful about how we reported it. Kevin's network of protection was strong, and one wrong move could destroy us before we could expose him. The breakthrough came when Grace discovered something that made us both gasp. He's been embezzling from the Employee Emergency Fund, Grace whispered, showing me bank statements. Money that was supposed to help workers in crisis. Kevin had been stealing from the fund, designed to help employees like Janet, like me, like anyone facing personal emergencies. The fund I'd contributed to for years, hoping it would be there if I ever needed help. Now I knew where Kevin's Tesla money really came from. Mom fell at the assisted living facility. The call came during a client meeting, and I watched Kevin's annoyed expression as I stepped out to take it. Mrs. Walsh, your mother needs immediate medical attention, but our insurance won't cover the ambulance unless you guarantee payment, the nurse explained. My hands shook as I gave them my credit card information, knowing it would max out my last available credit line. In the hospital waiting room, I calculated the mounting costs: ambulance, emergency room, follow-up care. When I returned to work the next day, Kevin called me into his office. Family emergencies are tough, he said with fake sympathy. Maybe you should consider that advance program we discussed. There was no advance program. Kevin was offering to loan me money at terms that would make me even more indebted to him. The predatory gleam in his eyes made me sick. I'll manage, I said quietly. That evening I saw Kevin's wife's Instagram post from her weekend in Napa Valley. The wine tasting alone cost more than my mother's ambulance ride. The irony was suffocating. Kevin was vacationing on stolen money while I couldn't afford my mother's medical care. But his arrogance would be his downfall. Every social media post was evidence of his lifestyle inflation that couldn't be explained by his official salary. Patricia Williams reached out to me through LinkedIn. Patricia had been my predecessor in the senior marketing role before Kevin arrived. She'd been restructured 6 months ago. I've been following what's happening in the department, Patricia said when we met for coffee. Kevin's doing to you exactly what he did to me. Patricia wasn't alone. She'd connected with 3 other former employees who'd been forced out since Kevin's arrival. All had similar stories of systematic undermining, false performance reviews, and eventual termination. We've been building a case, Patricia said, but we needed someone on the inside. She showed me recordings of client calls where Kevin had promised deliverables that were never completed. Clients who were furious about the drop in service quality since the restructuring. Contract negotiations that had fallen through because Kevin had overpromised and underdelivered. The clients are starting to ask questions, Patricia explained. They want to know why their primary contacts keep leaving. Some are threatening to take their business elsewhere. This was the missing piece. Kevin's internal manipulation was bad enough, but losing major clients would get Margaret Thompson's attention immediately. What do you need from me? I asked. Patricia smiled grimly. Just keep documenting everything. We're going to make sure Kevin can't do this to anyone else. Grace made the discovery that would end Kevin's career. Hidden in a maze of consulting contracts, she found evidence that Kevin was double billing clients for work that was never completed. Look at this invoice, Grace said, spreading papers across her desk. Kevin billed Westbrook Industries $25,000 for market research, but the same research was billed to Patterson Corp for $18,000. The research existed, but it was generic data that Kevin's consultants had recycled for multiple clients. Both companies thought they were getting custom analysis. It gets worse, Grace continued. The consulting company handling these contracts, it's owned by Kevin's wife. That was the smoking gun. Kevin had created a fake consulting company, hired himself to do work for his own department, then pocketed the difference between what clients paid and what work was actually delivered. The financial trail was clear. Kevin was running a sophisticated fraud scheme while cutting employee salaries to hide his theft. His wife's company has no employees except her, Grace explained. She's never worked in marketing or consulting. This is pure money laundering. We had him. Kevin had been so arrogant, so confident in his protection, that he'd left a paper trail leading directly back to his personal bank accounts. But we still needed to be strategic about how we exposed him. Grace and I decided to set a trap. We started feeding Kevin false information in meetings to see if he would lie about it later. I mentioned a fake client complaint about response times, knowing Kevin would want to shift blame. Sure enough, in the next management meeting, Kevin told Margaret Thompson that the marketing team was struggling with basic client communications. Haley's team needs more oversight, he said, not knowing I had recorded his earlier admission that no such complaint existed. We tried it again with fake budget numbers. I casually mentioned inflated costs for a campaign, then watched Kevin report those false numbers to the finance committee as evidence of departmental waste. Each lie was recorded, documented, and cross-referenced with the actual facts. Kevin was building a case against me based on information he knew was false. The pattern was clear. Kevin would take any negative information, real or imagined, and use it to justify his narrative that I was incompetent. But now we could prove he was knowingly lying to senior management. The trap worked perfectly because Kevin's arrogance made him sloppy. He was so confident in his protection that he never questioned whether the information was accurate. Margaret Thompson's assistant, Carol, reached out to me directly with a request that made my heart race. Miss Thompson would like to have a confidential conversation with you about recent departmental changes, Carol said over the phone. Are you available this Friday at 4 p.m.? I spent the entire week preparing. Grace helped me organize our evidence into a clear presentation. Kevin's financial fraud, discrimination against experienced employees, false performance reviews, and systematic client service failures. But I was terrified. If Kevin found out about this meeting, he could fire me before I had a chance to present the evidence. If Margaret didn't believe me, I'd be branded as a troublemaker. You have to do this, Grace said. Kevin's planning to fire you anyway. This is your only chance to fight back. The night before the meeting, I practiced my presentation until I could deliver it without notes. I organized documents chronologically, highlighted the most damaging evidence, and prepared for every question Margaret might ask. Emma found me in the living room at midnight, surrounded by papers. Are you going to fix the bad man at work? She asked sleepily. I hugged her tight. I'm going to try, sweetheart. Tyler Morrison came to me with evidence that changed everything. His hands were shaking as he handed me a flash drive. I recorded Kevin instructing me to fabricate client reports, Tyler said. He wanted me to backdate documents to cover up missed deadlines. The recordings were damning. Kevin's voice was clear as he explained how to alter timestamps, forge client signatures, and create false documentation. But Tyler had kept the original files as insurance. There's more, Tyler continued. Kevin's been having an affair with Brad Hutchinson's wife. He's using it to ensure Brad protects him from any HR complaints. My jaw dropped. Kevin had compromised the HR director through blackmail and adultery. No wonder Brad had been so quick to dismiss employee concerns. How do you know this? I asked. Tyler looked sick. Kevin bragged about it during a consultant dinner, said he had Brad by the balls and could get away with anything. This explained how Kevin had built such an impenetrable network of protection. He wasn't just hiring friends, he was compromising people through personal relationships and then leveraging that for professional gain. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. Tyler met my eyes. "Because what he's doing is wrong, and because I'm tired of being part of it." Our evidence portfolio was now overwhelming. Financial fraud, discrimination, harassment, ethics violations, breach of fiduciary duty, and embezzlement. But I needed one final piece to make the case irrefutable. Grace found it in the Employee Emergency Fund records. "Kevin didn't just steal from the fund," Grace said, her voice shaking with rage. "He manipulated the approval process to deny claims from people he wanted to force out." Janet Miller had applied for emergency assistance when her husband was diagnosed with cancer. Kevin had personally denied the claim, citing insufficient documentation, while simultaneously stealing from the same fund for his personal use. Sarah from HR had requested help with her mother's funeral expenses. Kevin denied it for budget constraints while paying for his wife's spa treatments with company money. The cruelty was breathtaking. Kevin had weaponized a fund designed to help employees in crisis, using it as a tool of control while enriching himself. "He's not just a thief," Grace said. "He's a sociopath." I stared at the evidence spread across Grace's desk. Documentation proving Kevin had systematically destroyed lives while building his personal wealth. The scale of his betrayal was beyond anything I'd imagined. Tomorrow, I would present everything to Margaret Thompson. Tonight, I organized it all into an irrefutable case that would end Kevin's career forever. I sat across from Margaret Thompson in her executive conference room, my hands trembling as I opened my presentation folder. 6 months of evidence was organized in neat binders, each section tabbed and cross-referenced. "I know this is highly unusual," I began, "but I have evidence of systematic fraud and misconduct that's damaging the company." Margaret leaned forward, her expression serious. "I've been concerned about departmental performance lately. Please, show me what you found." For the next hour, I walked Margaret through Kevin's scheme, the inflated consulting contracts, the embezzled emergency fund, the discrimination against experienced employees, the false client reports. Margaret's face grew darker with each revelation. When I showed her Kevin's wife's consulting company billing records, she actually gasped. "How long has this been going on?" Margaret asked. "At least 18 months, possibly longer," I replied. "Kevin's been very careful to cover his tracks, but the financial evidence is clear." Margaret studied the bank statements showing Kevin's personal expenses charged to client accounts. "This is criminal fraud. We need to involve law enforcement." I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. Margaret believed me. More importantly, she was taking action. "There's one more thing," I said, showing her Tyler's recordings. "Kevin compromised the HR director to prevent investigation." Margaret's jaw tightened. "We're calling an emergency board meeting. Thank you for bringing this forward, Haley." The next morning, Kevin was suspended pending investigation. I watched from my cubicle as security escorted him from the building, his face red with rage and confusion. "This is illegal," Kevin shouted in the lobby. "You can't do this to me." But Margaret had already called the FBI. Federal agents arrived that afternoon to seize Kevin's computer and files. The scope of his fraud was even larger than we'd discovered. Kevin tried to blame me for everything, claiming I was the mastermind and he was just following my instructions. But our timeline evidence made his claims impossible. The fraud predated my involvement in his schemes, and multiple witnesses contradicted his story. Brad Hutchinson resigned the same day, citing personal reasons. The affair scandal was spreading through the office like wildfire. By evening, local news crews were in our parking lot. Westbrook Industries executive arrested for embezzlement scrolled across the bottom of TV screens. I drove home in a daze, barely believing it was over. For months, Kevin had seemed untouchable. Now he was facing federal charges and complete professional ruin. Emma was waiting for me with a drawing she'd made at school. It showed 2 stick figures holding hands under a rainbow. "Is the bad man gone?" she asked. "Yes, sweetheart," I said, hugging her tight. "He's gone." Margaret offered me Kevin's position as Vice President of Marketing with a 60% salary increase and full back pay for the months I'd worked at the reduced rate. "You saved this company," Margaret said as she handed me the promotion letter. "Your integrity and courage prevented a much larger scandal." My first decision was establishing a proper employee assistance fund. With transparent oversight, I made sure Janet Miller received the emergency assistance Kevin had denied her, plus a settlement for wrongful termination. 3 of our major clients had been considering leaving because of Kevin's poor service. I met with each one personally, apologizing for the disruption and outlining our plans for improvement. "We want you to know," the Morrison Industries CEO told me, "that several former employees reached out to us about potential service issues. Your team's honesty saved our business relationship." Patricia Williams and the other wrongfully terminated employees received settlement offers and job opportunities. The department Kevin had torn apart was slowly healing. But the best moment came when I paid off Mom's assisted living facility in full and enrolled Emma in the art classes she'd been wanting to take. "We can afford this now?" Emma asked, looking at the art supply list. "Yes, sweetheart," I said. "We're going to be just fine." 6 months later, my department had the highest client satisfaction scores in company history. Kevin's scheme had damaged relationships and trust, but honest communication and quality work were rebuilding everything he'd destroyed. Kevin was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison and ordered to pay full restitution to Westbrook Industries and the employees he'd defrauded. His wife's consulting company was dissolved, and their assets were seized to cover the stolen money. 3 major competitors tried to poach me with enormous salary offers, but I chose to stay. Westbrook had given me the chance to prove myself and supported me when I exposed the fraud. Loyalty goes both ways. The new Employee Assistance Fund helped 12 families in its first 6 months. We also established an anonymous reporting system for workplace concerns, ensuring no one would face Kevin's retaliation again. Tyler Morrison became one of my most trusted team members, his courage in exposing Kevin earning him respect throughout the company. Grace Cox was promoted to head of internal audit, her investigative skills proving invaluable. But the most satisfying change was cultural. Gone were the days of taking credit for others' work or playing political games. We built a department based on merit, collaboration, and mutual respect. Last week, I received a letter from Kevin in prison. Not an apology, but a request for me to hire his nephew Tyler back, claiming the young man was unfairly caught up in the scandal. I read the letter twice, then filed it in my desk drawer labeled Inspiration. Sometimes I need reminders of how corruption spreads when good people stay silent. Today, I stood in my corner office watching Emma play in the company's new on-site childcare center that I'd championed. Mom visits weekly now, her care fully funded and her dignity restored. The view from my window shows the parking lot where Kevin used to park his Tesla, bought with stolen money. Now that space holds cars belonging to hardworking employees who earn their paychecks honestly. Grace knocked on my door, holding a report showing our department's record-breaking quarterly results. "The board wants to use our turnaround as a case study," she said. I smiled, thinking about the scared woman who'd signed those demotion papers 6 months ago. She thought her career was over. Instead, she discovered that the best revenge isn't just getting justice. It's building something better from the ashes of what was destroyed. Kevin thought he'd buried me. Instead, he'd given me the motivation to reach heights I'd never imagined possible.